Hello, I'm Taylor Graves, and my topic is on utilizing Sericea Lespedeza for small ruminants. When discussing forages in the state of Kentucky, we often think of alfalfa, fescue, orchard grass, and even bluegrass. However, there's a very useful forage that is often compared to alfalfa, but considered the poor man's alfalfa, and that is Sericea Lespedeza. A consistent challenge that small ruminant producers face is internal parasites. This includes gastrointestinal nematodes. We'll shorthand that for the rest of the PowerPoint. It'll just be GIN, so if you see that, that's our gastrointestinal nematodes. And coccidia. Internal parasites account for a substantial economic loss because of death loss. We also have poor growth rates, reduced reproductive performance. We'll see lower quality carcasses. And of course, we also have to add in the amount of time, money, and effort that our producers put in to treat our infected animals. This statistic comes from 2015, but I'm sure it holds pretty similar to today in current times. But internal parasites are the number one reason for non-predatory death loss among our small ruminants. Not only do we see economic hardships, we're also seeing where we have some compromise in animal health and welfare. Even once you get the worms out of these guys, it takes them a little bit longer to get back into the swing of things. It's been really hard on them, so anything we can do to help their health and welfare is really beneficial. Therefore, it's important that we have a very consistent and reliable method of deworming. Traditionally, we would worm small ruminants with anthelmintics, Safeguard, valbazen, sidectin, but a lot of times these wormers aren't labeled for small ruminant use. There's very limited that are, so sometimes we even have to do off-label with veterinarians' recommendations, but producers are finding that they're no longer quite as effective because we've used the same wormers over and over again. Also, in recent times, we've seen more concerns around drug resistance, which I just talked about, but also the drug residues. That's been a big concern in recent years, which has resulted in the growing interest to find alternative methods, preferably more natural, that could take the place of traditional wormers and substantially managing internal parasites within our small ruminants. So my solution to this is the poor man's alfalfa. So this is where our Sericea Lespedeza comes into play. So a little bit of background information on Sericea Lespedeza. It is native to Asia, but it's become really well adapted to the southeastern United States. You can see it throughout the entire United States, but I think it's more utilized maybe in the southeastern areas. Because of its adaptability, which we'll cover more on later, and deep root systems, it was heavily utilized in areas as a conservation plant. So mainly in mine reclamation areas, it was planted to help improve soil structure and fertility. It's also been utilized for ethnomedical purposes in China. It treated things such as anemia, dysentery, dog snake bites. There was a big list of about 20 things that they've utilized it for over there, which is really interesting. And what we're going to focus mainly on is its use for parasite control. So, Sericea Lespedeza contains condensed tannins that, when included in a small ruminant's diet, can affect gastrointestinal nematode infections by disturbing various key stages of the gastrointestinal nematode life cycle. So, how do we get Lespedeza growing? You could do it as a pure stand, or you can do it as a companion for your cool season grasses. So if you want to do it as a pure stand, I think that's something that is worth looking into. You can toss them in the spring when you see more infections. When you think they're in times of stress, your kidding, lambing seasons, you could put them in there. Or you can put it in with your cool season grasses as a companion, and it can be utilized to extend the life of your field, make it a little bit more productive. And it is a warm season perennial grass, so that's why it's used as a companion to our cool season grasses. According to the University of Kentucky's publication, it's the AGR 175, Sericea Lespedeza should be seeded March 15th to April 15th at the rate of 20 to 30 pounds per acre, a depth of 1/4 to 1/2 inch, and this will yield about 1 to 2 tons of dry matter. So like I said earlier, we're going to touch a little bit on its adaptability, which is one of the key advantages in utilizing Sericea Lespedeza. So it is tolerant to low fertility, drought, soil acidity, making it very, very easy to establish and maintain. It also has really deep root systems, which was utilized for improving our soil fertility. Plus, it's a legume, so it has its own nitrogen fixation, so you don't have to spread nitrogen over your fields. So once again, if you use it as a companion for your cool season grasses, that could cut back on some of the nitrogen that you would need to apply. And then it is insect and disease resistant. So there's very minimal insect or disease damage done to Sericea Lespedeza each year. So next I want to touch on a little bit of the research I've done that goes along to show how these condensed tannins in Sericea Lespedeza affect the amount of eggs per gram we see from gastrointestinal nematodes. It also affects the oocytes that we see from coccidia. So the first research article that I found was showing that small ruminants that are allowed to graze pastures or are fed a pellet or hay containing Sericea Lespedeza consistently have a lower volume of gastrointestinal nematodes in their fecal egg counts than those without Sericea Lespedeza in their diet. The first experiment was conducted on Katahdin lambs, and it was a confinement experiment, so they were all within the barns. They weren't allowed to graze on pasture, and they were supplemented Sericea Lespedeza daily. This resulted in reduced fecal egg counts within just 14 days. Another study was done. It was very similar, but it was conducted on goat kids, actually Kiko cross goat kids. And this was a two-phase study to determine the effects of Sericea Lespedeza pellets on coccidia and gastrointestinal nematodes. As you can see on the chart here, after 28 days, gastrointestinal nematode eggs per gram were reduced by 78.7%, and oocytes, which would be our coccidias, per gram were reduced by 96.9%. So this is a little bit of some different information. We mainly focus on gastrointestinal nematodes, but we see a big decrease in our coccidia numbers as well. And if you've worked with small ruminants, you know coccidia is sometimes annoyingly hard to treat, and there's not a ton of medications out there that work super well for it. So this is another benefit to the Sericea Lespedeza. So these studies show that feeding Sericea Lespedeza, no matter the form, is very beneficial in reducing those gastrointestinal nematodes in fecal egg counts. So the study that was completed on the Kiko goats, there was 2 phases to it. So the second phase, they wanted to test and see if the quality mattered. So they were feeding Sericea Lespedeza meal pellets, and they wanted to know if there was a difference between fresher pellets versus older pellets. It was concluded that there was a very limited minimal difference in both eggs per gram and oocytes per gram between the new and old Sericea Lespedeza meal pellets. So the conclusion was drawn that quality made very little difference in effectiveness. These results, I think, are promising. Sericea Lespedeza pellets can be kind of expensive because they have to be processed. So knowing that you don't have to have, the newest, the freshest, the highest quality, I think is really beneficial to our producers. They also know that it doesn't matter what form they feed it in, so they can go through and figure out what works best for them on their farm and make a decision on what to utilize. Overall, feeding Sericea Lespedeza in any form offers a natural way to reduce gastrointestinal nematodes, which also addresses the concern of drug resistance in our small ruminants. So we've already touched on a couple of these, but I think it's nice to do a quick overview. So for our advantages, of course, it controls gastrointestinal nematodes and coccidia. There's various forms to feed it in. You can graze it in the pasture, comes in pelleted form, you can make it a hay. It is a warm season annual, so it's complementary to cool season grasses. It's also been found that the condensed tannins increase amino acid flow to our small intestines, which can then improve the immune function that we see in our animals. Condensed tannins from Sericea Lespedeza have also been shown to reduce the amount of methane emissions made by small ruminants. Some other health benefits to our livestock include promoting anti-bloat, reducing somatic cell counts in goat milk, and even killing houseflies in animal feces. So overall, the use of Sericea Lespedeza in our small ruminants is beneficial not only to the animals, but also to our environment, and it can help relieve some of that consumer pressure, I feel like, as well. However, with everything, there's both good and bad, so I think it's important we cover our disadvantages as well. So while using Sericea Lespedeza is effective, it does come with its own set of disadvantages when you try to implement it in a nutritional plan. So for starters, condensed tannins, while very beneficial, also make your forage less palatable to graze. Hay making and processing it, making your pellets, can reduce the level of condensed tannins, making it a more suitable forage. It hasn't shown to decrease the value in terms of controlling gastrointestinal nematodes and coccidia if you do go ahead and process it in any form, but it does make it a more suitable forage. It still may not be their first choice. I've not known any animals to turn it away if it's their only option, but it isn't the most palatable forage that there is out there. Including it into your small ruminants diet has also proven to reduce digestibility, which can lead to a decrease in our average daily gains. In small ruminants, just depending on the level of inclusion, but I think it's also important to note that if you have an animal that's infected with gastrointestinal nematodes or coccidia, you're also going to see a reduction in your average daily gain. So that's something that you just kind of have to think, where does the producer's values lie within that? What would they rather see a reduction in average daily gain because of? So another possible drawback is how quickly Sericea Lespedeza can spread. We covered its adaptability, and because it is so adaptable to so many different places, sometimes it takes over and it becomes invasive. So while this is seen, it's a positive trait in most forages. You can plant it and it takes off and it grows really well. Some areas it was used, like we said, for mine reclamation. It's become invasive. An example of that would be Kansas. It's so invasive that they've tried to treat it with herbicides. They mow it down. What's been shown to be most effective actually is grazing it down with our small ruminants. But they've tried a bunch of different methods to kind of bring it in because it has spread so quickly. So this does require some management on our producers' end. They're going to have to make sure that they keep it cut down, make sure that it doesn't overtake if you use it as a complementary, the pasture that you have with the cool seasons. So you don't want it to overtake your cool season grasses. So of course we've got a list of disadvantages, but I think, hey, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and I think that appears to be the case with Sericea Lespedeza. Sure, it's invasive, but we also have a full list of advantages to go through as well. Now that we've talked research, I'd also like to talk some real-life applications. I reached out to some producers in the state of Kentucky, mainly goat producers, that utilize Sericea Lespedeza, just to see what they had to say about it. It's very apparent that they love it because it's beneficial to feed for our natural deworming abilities like we've discussed. But they also enjoy it because it offers a different variety of forage. So it's a very different texture. It's got a really woody stem, which, as we talked about, could make it less palatable to certain animals. However, our goats do enjoy to browse, so they like to reach out and, nibble on some trees, and they prefer that woody, stemmy texture. So for them, that might be something that they find beneficial because it just adds something different out into your field. Also, it grows about 18 to 40 inches tall. That's a little bit of an intermediate height, so they're not having to reach down quite as far to graze either. Producers also enjoyed that it's easy to establish. Like I said, it can become quite invasive, but it's really nice if you have pastures that maybe you don't have the best quality soil in, you don't feel comfortable sowing something in there. You can just go ahead and throw in some Sericea Lespedeza, and it'll take off and it will do really well. Personally, on my farm, we have hair sheep, so I've been doing this research, so I thought it'd be a great idea to go ahead and grow some Sericea Lespedeza. It may have not been their first choice to eat, but they did always eat what was in front of them in the fields. I used it as a complementary in a cool season grass field. I didn't find that it took over, and I think that was because they kept it grazed down, and because we had, of course, the differences in when they were maturing as well. But the sheep would eat it. It may not have been their first choice compared to some of the other forages out there, but they went ahead and finished it up, and I did see a decrease in the amount of wormers I needed to use throughout the year as well. Overall, all the producers I spoke to were aware that it's not a cure-all for parasite problems. Of course, we'll still face some parasite problems and have to use some more traditional wormers to treat those, but it's a really effective tool that can be added into their toolbox. So in conclusion, I think Terrell said it best when he said it may be time to consider changing the name of Sericea Lespedeza from the poor man's alfalfa to the smart man's alfalfa.